This is a Fox News alert. I'm Bret Baier in Washington. U.S. officials telling the Associated Press at this hour an active duty Army soldier has been arrested by the FBI on terrorism charges in Hawaii. Authorities say the soldiers had connections with the ISIS terror group. An FBI spokesman says SWAT special agents arrested Ikaika Kang Saturday. He says the soldier was with the 25th Infantry Division at Schofield Barracks in Honolulu. We'll have more on this story when information becomes available in the show. Now to a story and an angle that just won't go away for the president: Russian interference in last fall's election. Sunday, Donald Trump Jr. clarified his original response about why he talked to a Russian attorney with supposed ties to the Kremlin. White House aides say nothing came from the meeting, and the uproar and the headlines about it are an overreaction to a whole lot of nothing. But the president's critics say this is part of a continuing pattern of members of the campaign or transition forgetting about meetings with various Russians and then recanting and recharacterizing why they were meeting. Correspondent Kevin Cork has the latest tonight from the White House. Good evening, Kevin.
Brett, you're right. This story just doesn't seem to go away. This is either the most direct suggestion between the Trump campaign and Russian officials, or it's simply a matter of a meeting that was set up under false pretenses that had absolutely nothing to do with the campaign itself.
Our position is that no one within the Trump campaign colluded in order to influence the election.
Like his father, Donald Trump Jr. took to Twitter today, firing back at suggestions that by taking a meeting with a Russian lawyer for the purpose of getting dirt on the Clinton campaign during the 2016 race, that it meant his team had somehow colluded with the Kremlin. Tweeting tongue-in-cheek, "Obviously, I'm the first person on a campaign to ever take a meeting to hear info about an opponent. Went nowhere, but had to listen." White House officials say the president only learned about the meeting a couple days ago. But critics argue the fact that the campaign's operatives, Jared Kushner and Paul Manafort, were there at all is highly unethical.
There's no reason for this Russian government advocate to be meeting with Paul Manafort or with Mr. Kushner or with the president's son if it wasn't about the campaign and Russia policy.
This is the first time the public has seen clear evidence that senior level officials of the Trump campaign met with potentially an agent of a foreign government to try to obtain information that would discredit Hillary Clinton.
In a statement, Mr. Trump Jr. discounted the meeting with Natalia Veselnitskaya, writing, quote, "Her statements were vague, ambiguous, and made no sense. She began discussing the adoption of Russian children. It became clear to me that this was the true agenda all along."
I think what's important here is that we're at day 200 or so of no evidence of Russian collusion. People think they want to convert wishful thinking into hard evidence.
Asked about the lawyer, Putin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said, "We don't know who she is. And obviously we can't keep track of all the meetings of all Russia lawyers in Russia and abroad." The latest Russian saga managed to momentarily knock the White House off message, following a G20 that saw the president deliver a powerful speech in Poland but steer clear of sanctions talk. Sanctions were not discussed in my meeting with President Putin, the president tweeted. "Nothing will be done until Ukrainian and Syrian problems are solved." That appeared to contradict Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, who said the president did tell Putin that Congress was pushing for more sanctions. The president also lashed out at critics of his daughter Ivanka, who momentarily filled his seat while he conducted a meeting on the sidelines of the summit. If Chelsea Clinton were asked to hold a seat for her mother, he tweeted, "As her mother gave our country away, the fake news would say Chelsea for Prez." That drew this response: "Good morning, Mr. President. It would never have occurred to my mother or my father to ask me, were you giving our country away? Hoping not." Speaking of Twitter, late this afternoon, Brett, Donald Trump Jr. said that he would be happy to pass along what he knows. He said that in a tweet, talking about possibly speaking to the Senate Intelligence Committee. It's also important to note that the outside counsel team for the Trumps has said this about this lawyer that we talked about in the piece. She may have been connected to Fusion GPS. That's actually an opposition research team that has been backed by the Democrats. Brett?
Kevin Cork, live on the North Lawn. Kevin, thank you. Let's get some analysis on this story and reaction from senior political analyst Bret Hume. Good evening, Bret.
Hi, Bret.
Your thoughts?
Well, when you step back from this just a little bit and look at it, it looks kind of like a farcical episode in which young Mr. Trump, Donald Trump Jr., was conned into holding a meeting with this Russian lawyer who had a cause to promote, that is to say the cause of American adoptions of Russian children, which has been frozen since a dispute between the earlier administration and the Russian government. And to get him to come to have such a meeting, she hinted or indicated that she had some information on Hillary Clinton, possibly involving Hillary Clinton campaign connections to the Russians, that she wanted to spill. And they get in the meeting, and she didn't have any such information from what we know. And presently, it turns out that she wanted to talk about this issue of adoption, which young Mr. Trump pointed out correctly that neither he nor his father were in any position to do anything about, since they were both still private citizens. The meeting probably went nowhere and ended without any information being passed. And the whole thing sort of has the elements of a farce.
So when you hear Senator Warner, others saying that this is part of a pattern where somebody on the campaign or the transitions forgets that they've met with Russians and then recharacterizes when they finally have to come forward because of some New York Times, Washington Post, whatever story that's come out.
I would be more concerned by that if the episodes themselves, the meetings, the contacts or whatever, turned out to be of some substantive meaning, in the sense that they pointed in the direction that there was some cooperation and collusion going on. So far, what we've seen doesn't seem to do that, and it's not hard for me to imagine that people associated with the president's campaign might have forgotten them. I mean, this meeting seems to be eminently forgettable, almost laughable.
Again, they're saying for someone to meet with somebody from a foreign country is different than someone just meeting who has Oppo research.
Well, that may be so, but meetings with people, first of all, there is a conflation being made here between this woman, whom the Kremlin, perhaps not truthfully, but the Kremlin is saying they don't know anything about it. They don't even know this. Putin doesn't even know this woman, right? And you can't be a prominent lawyer or a lawyer of any standing in Moscow without, in some way being connected to the Kremlin, because the Kremlin is connected to nearly everything in Russia. But that doesn't make her a Russian agent. It certainly doesn't make her a Russian official, as she's being characterized by some of the president's critics. My own view of this is it's kind of an interesting story. It does speak to a certain Keystone Cops quality among the Trump people, who seem not, to know what makes sense and easily lured into a meeting that goes nowhere. But it just doesn't add up to some kind of cooperation between the campaign and actual Russian officials. It just doesn't get us there.
So put Brit Hume down as nothing burger.
Well, I wouldn't. That's a phrase that's gotten to be so common. I've kind of hesitated to use it. I just don't think the thing is, nothing seems to have come of it, and it just doesn't go very far.
Bret, as always, thank you.
You bet, Bret.
Well, what do you think? Do you think the Donald Trump Jr. meeting is significant or changes the dynamic in any way with all these ongoing investigations? Let me know on Twitter at @BretBaier. You can use the hashtag Special Report, or on Facebook at facebook.com/BretBaier.SR. Did former FBI Director James Comey break the law when he had a friend leak information about his meetings with President Trump to the media, specifically those memos? The president thinks so, and he wants you to know it. What do we know about the Comey memos and what lawmakers are looking at tonight? Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge has the latest.
A legal source close to the matter tells Fox News the fired FBI director's memos documenting his conversations with President Trump are considered government records, and some of the material contained classified information, as first reported by the Hill newspaper. All FBI employees sign these employment agreements that block the unauthorized storage or sharing of government material.
It is hard to believe that that information would not be classified, and in furtherance, if it is true that the information was secret and or confidential, then that would be in violation of the rules.
Comey justified his actions to a Senate panel last month.
You consider it to be somehow your own personal document that you could share with the media as you wanted to?
Correct.
Through a friend?
I understood this to be my recollection recorded of my conversation with the president. As a private citizen, I felt free to share that. I thought it very important to get it out.
Writing in a tweet today, President Trump claimed James Comey leaked classified information to the media. That is so illegal. One of the president's aides went further on Fox and Friends.
The Boy Scout choir boy defense doesn't hold up here by handing over, admitting under oath, handing over classified information through, quote, private recollection. Doesn't matter what he calls it, matters what it is.
Senator Warner is the senior Democrat on the Intelligence Committee.
I've seen these reports that there may have been after the fact classification. We don't know who may have classified those documents, if they were classified, and I want to get the answer to that.
A year ago this month, then Director Comey publicly chastised Hillary Clinton and her team for their careless handling of highly classified material and the use of a personal server for government business.
His recent actions and what he admitted to is very contradictory.
Comey gave memos to a Columbia Law School professor who told Fox today that he never gave hard copies to the media. No memos were classified at the time he received them. But Comey may be criticized over retroactive classification, the same issue that damaged Clinton's campaign, Brett.
Captain, thank you. The president is putting more pressure on Congress to get something done on health care between vacations. Many Republican senators are already bailing on their own version of an Obamacare repeal and replace measure, and the legislative clock is ticking. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel is on Capitol Hill tonight.
Senators return to Capitol Hill facing plenty of tension over health care reform. Fox has learned there's a new timeline, getting an updated bill text to senators on Thursday, a CBO score as soon as Monday, and a vote late next week.
Most of the folks that we're having trouble with do want to get to yes. They do support most of the bill. There are people who aren't quite there yet.
At least 10 GOP senators are opposed to the original Republican proposal. With 52 Republicans, there can only be 2 no votes to pass a bill with Vice President Pence serving as the tiebreaker. And now several Republicans have declared the original bill dead, but Majority Leader Mitch McConnell hasn't given up.
He is trying to rework to get something that works, that will pass, but the original version, 10 folks opposing, it's not going to pass.
President Trump issued a warning this morning on Twitter. I cannot imagine that Congress would dare to leave Washington without a beautiful new health care bill fully approved and ready to go.
Health care is a human right.
There was also pressure on Republican senators at town hall events in their home states. Ted Cruz faced some protesters in Texas.
Please don't pass your version of health care legislation.
On the other side, Senator Bernie Sanders is trying to move the health care debate to the left.
As soon as we defeat this disastrous bill, I will be introducing a Medicare for all single-payer program.
McConnell wanted a health care bill complete by late June. Now there's fear that more health care delays could sidetrack other issues like infrastructure, raising the debt limit, and even tax reform. If McConnell wants to get something like tax reform through, he may soon be forced to abandon health care. That's because Republicans want to use the same filibuster-proof process for tax reform that they're currently using for health care. Problem is, McConnell can't use the same maneuver for 2 bills at the same time.
This legislative backup is why some lawmakers are calling for reducing or dropping the August recess. They likely worry about facing their constituents with very few points on the board. Brett?
Mike Emanuel live on the Hill. Mike, thanks. We've told you before about the massive gains Republicans made in state and local government during the Obama years. Tonight, a challenge to the way the voting maps are drawn up in one state that might portend changes in others. Correspondent Casey Stiegel has the story from San Antonio, Texas.
It has been a legal battle 6 years in the making. Did Texas violate the Federal Voting Rights Act after the state's Republican-controlled legislature mapped out new congressional and House district lines back in 2011?
Whoever gets to draw the boundaries of electoral districts can draw them in such a way that they advantage their political party.
The courts redrew those maps in 2013, but many minority advocacy groups challenged, saying the new lines were still drawn to favor the GOP and, quote, dilute the Democrat vote. Plaintiffs call it discrimination since more Latinos and African Americans tend to vote Democrat.
We're only at 16% of the U.S. Congress in Texas are Latino. The exact same number since 1970.
In March, a panel of 3 federal judges sided against Texas, saying lawmakers, quote, intentionally discriminated against minority voters. The following month, month, a similar ruling was issued by the same trio of judges regarding the state's House districts, once again accusing Texas of stacking the deck.
We are confident in our arguments in this case and optimistic that the current redistricting plans for Congress and for the Texas House of Representatives will be found fair and legal.
The stakes are high. If Texas fails to make a compelling argument, the courts could order the state to redraw its maps before the 2018 election. Punishment is also on the table, which could restrict how Texas conducts elections moving forward, requiring district lines be approved by the Department of Justice.
And back out here live tonight outside the federal court in San Antonio, Texas has said it plans to appeal the decision if it does not go in their favor, meaning this could go all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. As you know, the High Court has already agreed to pick up a different redistricting case out of the state of Wisconsin. Brett? Casey, thank you. Former President Obama will headline a fundraiser for the Democratic effort to weaken the GOP advantage through redistricting. Mr. Obama will appear before a few dozen people at a private event here in Washington Thursday. The group wants to address what it calls unfair gerrymandering practices around the U.S. On the markets now, stocks were mixed today. The Dow lost 6, the S&P 500 gained 2, the Nasdaq was up 23. A hearing continues in Pennsylvania in the death of a fraternity pledge at Penn State University. 18 members of the group face charges, including involuntary manslaughter and aggravated assault. The 19-year-old student died after a night of drinking. The judge will decide if there's enough evidence to send this case to trial. Up next, President Trump may be sending some new detainees to Guantanamo Bay. Gitmo back in the headlines. We'll have that. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 5 in New York with the start of what Governor Andrew Cuomo predicts will be a summer of hell. Repairs are beginning at the country's busiest train station. Work on tracks and signals in Penn Station did not seem to have a major impact on this morning's commute. The work is scheduled to continue through the end of August. Fox 40 in Sacramento as California Governor Jerry Brown declares a state of emergency in the area affected by a huge grass fire. The wall fire has spread to 5,600 acres so far. It's damaged critical infrastructure and forced the evacuation of residents. The blaze is said to be only 35% contained. And this is a live look at Seattle from our affiliate Q13 Fox. The big story there tonight, the Seattle City Council is deciding whether to impose an income tax on high-income households. The measure would add 2.25% of total annual income. Opponents say it's illegal and unconstitutional. That is tonight's live look. Outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back. The parents of a terminally ill British child who want to pursue new treatment will get another chance to change the judge's mind. After hearing today, the judge set a new session for Thursday. Charlie Gard's parents say they have fresh evidence their son should receive experimental treatment, possibly in the U.S. So far, British and European courts have sided with the hospital's decision in Great Britain that the 11-month-old boy's life should end. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is in Kuwait seeking to mediate the dispute between Qatar and its Arab neighbors. Tillerson will be in the region most of the week trying to break the impasse involving American allies. Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Bahrain, and the UAE cut off relations with Qatar over allegations of ties and funding of terrorism and extremism. You may recall then-candidate Donald Trump promising to not only keep the terror prison at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, open, but to repopulate it with new detainees. There may be some progress tonight toward doing just that. National Security Correspondent Jennifer Griffin tells us about it from the Pentagon.
Among President Obama's first orders after taking office was to close the U.S. detention facility at Guantanamo Bay. The Obama administration released more than 200 prisoners in 8 years. President Bush released 113 of the 122 Gitmo detainees who returned to the battlefield, according to Pentagon statistics. On the campaign trail, then-candidate Trump vowed to keep Gitmo open.
We're going to load it up with some bad dudes, believe me. We're going to load it up.
On Friday, Friday, Attorney General Jeff Sessions, his deputy Rod Rosenstein, and the Director of National Intelligence Dan Coates visited Guantanamo Bay. In March, Sessions praised the facility.
I've been there a number of times as a senator, and it's just a very fine place for holding these kind of dangerous criminals. We've spent a lot of money fixing it up, and I'm inclined to the view that it remains a perfectly acceptable place.
The Pentagon would not release any images of the visit. The Justice Department issued a statement. Recent attacks in Europe and elsewhere confirm that the threat to our nation is immediate and real, and it remains essential that we use every lawful tool available to prevent as many attacks as possible. The Obama administration argued Gitmo served as a propaganda tool for terrorist recruitment.
They just have to look to the images of ISIS prisoners being led to their death in orange jumpsuits. I mean, there is no question that Guantanamo and the abuses that it symbolizes are being used by our adversaries against us.
Congress blocked President Obama from closing the prison and transferring detainees to U.S. federal prisons. 41 prisoners remain, including accused 9/11 mastermind Khalid Sheikh Mohammed.
But keeping Gitmo open is expensive, about $10 million per detainee each year. If they were held in a Supermax facility, it would be only $100,000 per year. Brett?
Jennifer Griffin at the Pentagon. Jennifer, thank you. Another Fox News alert, an update to our top story, the arrest of an active duty U.S. Army soldier on terrorism charges in Hawaii. Fox News has confirmed the arrest of 34-year-old Akaika Eric Kang. The FBI says Kang has been under investigation for more than a year. He's accused of swearing allegiance to ISIS, attempting to provide military documents to ISIS, and attempting to provide training to the terrorist organization. The Bureau believes Kang was acting alone. We'll continue to bring updates on this story as we get them. Iraqi forces are still battling ISIS terrorists in a small area of Mosul. On the day, the Iraqi prime minister declared a total victory for Iraq and all of Iraqis in the country's second largest city. Iraqi commanders say there are still areas of the old city that must be back cleared of explosive devices and possible ISIS fighters in hiding. Now to the Syrian civil war and the second day of the latest ceasefire. Correspondent John Huddy reports from the Israeli-controlled section of the Golan Heights tonight.
This is a village in the Quneitra province of southern Syria back in 2011. This is what's left of it today. A mosque and homes, now rubble. The UN estimates that more than 400,000 people have been killed in Syria since 2011. The Quneitra province is one of three so-called de-escalation zones in the latest ceasefire agreement in Syria. The Dara and Sawaida provinces along the border with Jordan are the others. We went to the Israeli-held Golan Heights today to see if the ceasefire is holding. This is the border fence. On the other side is Syria. And while we've heard sporadic gunfire, it remains, for the most part, quiet. 48 hours ago, the civil war was raging there. This is the fifth attempt at a ceasefire in Syria since February 2016. The others crumbled within days. The U.S., Russia, and Jordan brokered this latest effort, announced Friday after President Trump met with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said today, despite the ceasefire starting at noon on Sunday, it is yet to be, he says, consolidated, meaning, in short, all the details are still being ironed out.
It's a very difficult conflict, and while looking for approaches in which it could be solved, we have to bear in mind the position of a large number of players.
One of the challenges will be enforcing the ceasefire. While the details are worked out, Russia's military may patrol the de-escalation zones, and that is a point of contention for Israel, as Russia is allied with both Syria and Iran. Now, a new round of peace talks, meanwhile, is underway in Geneva, but expectations are low that any long-term peace will come out of it. Brett?
John Huddy in the Golan Heights. John, thank you.
As far as North Korea is concerned, I don't know. We'll see what happens. I don't like to talk about what I have planned, but I have some pretty severe things that we're thinking about. That doesn't mean we're going to do them. I don't draw red lines.
We're very prepared, but I think it's important not to take the idea of military action on the Korean Peninsula or war lightly. And this is a situation in which we need to get North Korea and China in a corner and not put our president in the corner.
The North Korea situation very tense tonight as talks continue and talks about what to do next. Let's talk about some of those challenges facing the U.S. military tonight. Retired U.S. Navy Admiral Robert Natter is former commander of the U.S. Atlantic Fleet. He joins us tonight. Admiral, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Brett.
This is obviously a very tense situation. What's your take on what the North Koreans have done, what they're going to do?
Well, it's obvious that they've developed a missile delivery system, and the most recent test was a test of an ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missile. It had a very high trajectory. The apex was 1,600 miles or so, and they probably did that on purpose so as not to violate airspace of their neighbor Japan.
And as far as the timeline of being able to be effective with that, and also the other component, which is miniaturizing a nuclear bomb on that missile, do we have a timeline?
Well, I would say it's very short, if not immediate. My take is that they've tested 5 nuclear devices successfully. That's the long pole in the tent, technologically. Miniaturizing it is not as technologically difficult as getting the devices to go. We've seen pictures of Kim Jong-un standing before encapsulated devices that he called nuclear weapons. We have to take him to his word in this kind of a threat.
So understanding that talk is what the preferred method now, right, and pressure, and we can talk about that in a minute, but military options as far as what the U.S. can do if pushed to that moment.
Well, we have the ability to prevail in North Korea. There's no doubt about that. As a former 7th Fleet commander, I was directly involved in the war plans should it come to that end. The reality is we don't want that because it would be ugly. For example, in the 3-year Korean War from 1950 to 1953, we lost 54,000 U.S. military personnel there. In the war on terrorism for the last 16 and a half years, we've lost a total of 6,800, just to put all that in context.
So could we take out their missiles, considering that they're moving them around? What specific military options?
Well, we have the ability to put a spotlight on North Korea and track to a great extent things that they're doing. And if it came to conflict, we would focus every asset on the North Korean peninsula, and it would be ugly.
Now, we see the celebration after this launch from North Korea. What about the other track? And this is the pressure track. We heard Nikki Haley at the UN talking about not only pressuring China, but also anyone who helps North Korea in any way, shape, or form.
Well, that's the exact appropriate approach. The sanctions that we've had over the last 20 years have been porous, to say the least. They've been half-hearted. We haven't enforced them, and that's the reality.
I mean, you have other countries moving stuff in there.
Exactly, and so sanctions can be imposed on them. Sanctions can be imposed on shipping companies, on banks, on companies that are selling them to them. We need to have those kinds of sanctions, certainly going to that extent and that effort before we ever go to combat.
How, if you were to put a percentage on it, I know it's tough, the percentage that we would be involved in some kind of military action within the year with North Korea, what would you put it at?
Well, I hate to guess about things like that. I would say that at this point, based on what they're doing and how far along they are with their technology, I would put it at less than 50%. But if they continue on this trajectory, that percentage is going to climb.
Because the threat is direct. I mean, it's not make-believe.
We have 40,000 troops based in Korea. We have another 50,000 based in Japan, along with their families. When we put those people at risk, this is serious business for us.
Finally, Admiral, one of the bases you used to command was Guantanamo Bay. You just did this story about possibly repopulating Gitmo. Your thoughts about that?
Well, Guantanamo Bay is the perfect place to have this sort of a prison. The idea that we're going to bring these prisoners potentially to the United States and say, oh, we'll just throw them in a supermax prison. Well, what about the surroundings? What about the communities that surround those prisons? We have brought a couple of these folks back and put them in prisons. We put one in the Naval Prison in Norfolk, Virginia. I can tell you there was enhanced security and there were increased costs associated with that. And that was for one prisoner.
So you think it's a good idea?
I think it's a very good idea because of its isolation. They're not going to swim home. They're not going to escape. And indeed, no one would ever attempt to come in and free them. That's not going to happen at Guantanamo Bay.
Admiral Natter, we appreciate your time.
Thank you, sir.
Something or nothing.